Hey everyone, Nick here and welcome back to GamerTube, and welcome to our finale of our Little Nightmares character concept series. So throughout this year we have made a whole bunch of Little Nightmares character concepts videos. We've told many creepy and interesting stories, and now it's finally time to tell you the final tale. So the final character that's finishing off the series is the Queen. So we'll be going into the Queen's location, their gameplay mechanics, their backstory, and all that good stuff as well. And as always, I will just state that these are just a couple of our own ideas. We don't really expect Bandai Namco or Tarsier Studios to take these ideas and make them into a game or a DLC. These are just some creepy stories we get to tell, and we hope you've enjoyed all the ones we've had so far. And lastly, before we start today's video, if you could please consider subscribing, as it helps out a lot and it is greatly appreciated. It also keeps you up to date with all the videos that we post. Alright everyone, well let's get into the finale of our Little Nightmares character concept series with the Queen. So before we get into the finale, let's recap all the events that happened so far. So in the beginning, we were introduced to our main protagonist, Hollow. We see them roaming around the dark, disease-infested village. They needed to find a cure for their friend who was stricken with the plague. They seeked out a plague doctor for help, only to find they've been corrupted by a dark, sinister slime and have actually been spreading the plague to the villagers the whole time. The doctor infected multiple rats and let them loose amongst the villagers to spread the deadly plague. In the end, our protagonist managed to grab the cure and run off and save their friend. The plague doctor almost grabbed them, but instead was attacked by the multiple rats they infected. The child managed to escape and run back to the outskirts of the village where they could heal their little friend. After the ordeal with the plague doctor, our protagonist has finally cured their friend. Both of them haven't eaten anything in days. So Hollow decides to look for food back in the village whilst their friend recovers completely. After sneaking back into the plague-ridden village, they begin searching for food. But everything they came across was unsightly and rotten. Most of the food was covered in the same dark coloured slime, just like the plague doctor had dripping from their mask. Nothing in this village was remotely edible. After hours of searching and having nothing to show for it, they eventually come across a dark looking castle. After sneaking into the castle and finding some edible food in an empty dining hall, they eventually met the Jester. A crazed entertainer that was also corrupted by the dark slime. They used the slime to paint on the walls and even paint their emotions on their white eerie mask. After collecting some food and alerting the Jester, they were chased throughout the castle. They found themselves in a dark room where they were forced to escape via a chute in the wall. Now they find themselves in the dungeon of the castle. This is where they came across the deadly executioner. Hollow had to carefully sneak through the dungeon and avoid alerting this frightening looking character. After carefully navigating their way through the dungeon, the executioner eventually got the best of them. After bursting out of an Iron Maiden and chasing Hollow to the dungeon exit, they eventually were beaten by our little character when they pulled the lever and tangled the executioner's helmet in a bunch of chains. We find out as well that the dark sinister slime was living inside them. After Hollow escapes the dungeon, we then get introduced to our second character, the Pale Child. After noticing that their friend has been missing for quite some time now, they decided to go venture into the village and find them. But before they could make it there, their path was blocked by a disturbing looking character, the Lumberjack. The Lumberjack forced the Pale Child back into the forest where they began to hunt for them. The Lumberjack had the ability to see using all the trees in the forest. This meant no matter where they were, they could always be able to see you. After finding more of the dark slime coming from the trees, the Pale Child decided to use it to their advantage. They poured the slime into the trees and then it would pour out of the Lumberjack's eye holes and fully envelop them. After beating the lumberjack, they continue on their journey to find Hollow. Back at the castle, as Hollow tries to find the exit, they come across the deadly armoured character, the Knight. The Knight was practicing in the armoury as Hollow tried to sneak towards the open window and escape. They realised they were too far up and they had to enter back into the castle. After dodging all the Knight's deadly attacks, they finally got captured. Just as the Knight went to grab them, one of the wooden training dummies crashed down on top of them. So now, this is the part where Hollow and the Pale Child find each other once again. They continue their journey as the Pale Child leads them out of this castle. After getting to the exit, they realise that it's covered in the troublesome slime. The slime forms multiple eyeballs that need to be destroyed in order to free the gate. As our two characters are down to their last slimy eyeball, it leaps off the door and goes into a strange room. This is where they met the king of the castle. They managed to steal their prized jewels and use them to open up the strange room. They then found themselves in the royal quarters. They had to hide from this disturbing king and eventually tricked them into destroying the last eye. They then tricked the king into destroying their precious crown. The king rushed away in a panic to repair their broken crown. The children took this as an opportunity to finally escape and make a run for the castle exit. Unfortunately for our two characters, they now run into a character that is far worse. Okay, so now that we're all caught up, let's get started. Both the children quickly run the other way. They didn't get a good look at whatever was in their way. They only got a glimpse of the shadowy figure. As the individual got closer and closer, they had no choice but to enter back into the royal room that they just escaped from. As they quietly entered the room, they once again found a place to hide. As they peered out from the hiding area, they got a better look at who this individual was. As they entered the room, it was revealed to be the Queen. The Queen is a disturbing looking character with long narrow fingers and a frightening disfigured face. Their stare was haunting and cold. It was almost like their face was frozen in a horrific scream. Their gown and arms were covered in the dark slime. Something seemed different about them. Sure, all the characters they ran into so far have been intent on capturing and eating them, but something didn't seem right. Although all the residents of the village have been influenced by the slime, they still had some sentience. The Queen, on the other hand, looked to have no free will of her own. Just an empty, hollow shell. Although they couldn't help but feel like something else occupied this shell. As the children continue to hide, they then see the king exit from the other room. He quickly rushes towards the Queen on the other side. The king looks surprised. They haven't seen their queen in weeks. They suddenly wandered off from the castle, and they thought they would never return. The queen just stares back at the king, motionless. The king suddenly realises what's happened. The queen must have consumed a great quantity of the dark fluid, and they now fear that they've gone too far. The king quickly rummages through a set of drawers and pulls out a small vial filled with a purple liquid. Hollow and the Pale Child stare wide-eyed at the purple vial. It was the cure. And they had a whole drawer filled with the vials. The king approaches the queen with the vial in their hand. As they get one step closer, the queen lets out a deafening scream. The scream is intense. It feels like time has stood still. Both the children struggle to move and can hardly breathe. The king, who's standing right in front of the queen, taking the full force of her screams, suddenly dissolves away. Their body melts into a puddle of the dark fluid. As their robe and crown lay on the ground, the puddle slides over to the queen and joins her body. Finally, the screaming stops. The children can feel their movement come back to them. The Queen wanders into the next room, giving the children a moment to escape. They quickly leave the room and head for the final door. They had to get out of here quickly. Who knows how deadly this Queen really is? When they finally reach the door, they can see that it's been unlocked. As they go to open it and finally escape this nightmarish castle, the doors swing open and steps through is the Jester. The Jester bursts through the doors holding the Knight's spear. They weren't going to let these troublesome kids leave so easily. They thrust the spear in their direction as they narrowly dodge the oncoming attacks. The children then turn and run the other way, but in the distance they can see the Queen. The children were trapped from either side. They both wince in fear as the Queen walks straight past them. The Queen walks up to the Jester as they bow in front of her. The Queen approaches the bowing Jester as she holds their face in her hands. The Queen lets out another scream as the Jester's body dissolves into the thick dark slime. Once again it joins her body and becomes one with the Queen. All of a sudden her constant scream is cut short. She looks down and sees the spear has pierced right through her. As she looks back, she sees a little child with a tin head holding the sharp weapon with all their strength. The thick dark fluid oozes out of their wound. Enough was enough. Hollow and the pale child were getting out of this castle one way or another. The Queen turns around and faces the children. She stares at them both and lets out one final scream. The sound echoes throughout the castle and the entire village. The large mass of dark slime flows from multiple areas as it makes its way into the castle and envelops the Queen. Hollow and the pale child quickly run away as far as they can. The corridor can't contain the massive slime any longer. The castle begins to crumble around them as they get bigger and bigger. As half the castle collapses around them, both the children dive to safety. As they help each other up, they turn and face the creature standing behind them. They are now faced with the abomination known as the Corrupt Queen. The Corrupt Queen is a large mass of everyone in the village who was infected with the dark slime. Every single drop that plagued the village was now a part of this monstrous mass. We now come to the final boss battle segment. The Queen will stop at nothing to let these little intruders get past her. She planned to infect them with the slime and make them both a part of her grotesque twisted mass. Hollow notices amongst the rubble was the stash of purple vials that were in the royal quarters. Both the children have to climb up and retrieve the antidotes one at a time and hurl them towards the Corrupt Queen. In this gameplay segment, each player would take turns grabbing a new vial and throwing it towards the giant creature. The players would need to dodge oncoming attacks and make sure they were on the right platform at the right time. Every time they hit the Queen's body, the glass vials would break and soak the solution into her body. After the players have thrown enough vials, the Queen would start to weaken. It now comes down to the last vial. Just as the weakened Queen goes to attack, Hollow throws the vial as it lands in her mouth. The creature begins to melt down into a large puddle. All of the slime starts to steam up and eventually evaporates. They did it, they finally won. They both climb down from the rubble and exit the castle. As they take a step out of the castle, out of nowhere, one of the last remnants of the fluid leaps out of the rubble and attaches itself to the pale child. It sinks into their skin as it desperately searches for a new host. The pale child suddenly falls to the ground. Hollow rushes over to help them, but there's nothing they can do. All of a sudden, the slime leeches back out of the pale child's skin and leaps onto the ground. It starts to die, then fizzles away. Little did this dark slime know, the antidote was in the pale child's blood from the beginning. Hollow then starts to tend to the pale child. They're still breathing, and they just seem tired. Hollow picks them up and walks through the village. As they get to the entrance of the village, Hollow gently places them down on the ground and walks over to the village sign. Now, this place is free. It has a chance to start again. Hopefully in time, this village can grow into something greater. Seeing the pale child was the one to finally defeat the sinister slimy corruption, it only seemed fair to rename it. They pick up a sharp rock and carve the word pale. They gently pick them up again and set out into the forest. As the many years went by, the village did indeed change into something much greater. Alrighty everyone, well that's all we have for today's video and this series as a whole. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider leaving a like, commenting and subscribing, as it helps out a lot and it is greatly appreciated. And like always, do be sure to comment down below what you thought of today's video and overall what you thought of this series and the ending as well. And also, I will just state that this isn't the ending of our What Needs to Be series as a whole. We have plenty more ideas on the horizon, so keep an eye out for them. And lastly, I wanted to give a very big thank you to everyone who was involved, mainly Jordan and Jay, the other members of GamerTube, who gave me a lot of support, help and inspiration throughout this whole series. Also, a big thank you to the artists Jafer and Rotas for making some awesome looking characters and really paving the way for this series. And lastly, a thank you to you, the viewer. Thank you for sticking around and watching all of our episodes. Whether you've been here from the start or you've just dropped in these new episodes, we do appreciate the views and the comments and the support. Alrighty, well, into the next new What Needs to Be series video, I'll catch you later, bye.